to pronounce and has been added by T.S. Eliot.
So, madam, as it is shown in the slide, and you rightly suggested that it is an interior monologue, as it is shown on the slide.
Yes.
So, technique-wise, T.S. Eliot is using this technique of interior monologue, and thereby using the stream of consciousness in his
We may
in
say,
his poem,
huh.
and in this way, giving expression to the weariness, regret, embarrassment, frustration, emasculation, hopelessness, decay that this protagonist faces, I think. So that is the
Even in the beginning when
Yes.
it has been addressed you and I.
Yeah.
You means not the other person. It is Prufrock himself. And we may say other, he has divided himself into two.
yes,
No totality is there. That is also mentioned in the very beginning of the poem.
yes, very right. So the poem is an earlier attempt. It comes in the earlier phase of his poetic career, and as it is shown on the slide, 2-3 things are mentioned there: a complete break from the 19th century tradition, a revolutionary poem, its title is ironic, and an interior monologue.
So it's a portrait of failure, and it's not of a one person only. It's this Prufrock is the image of the everyman in modern civilization, especially in Europe.
Yes, very right. So, by by the time when Eliot was writing Prufrock, as I said, he was the progression that I was talking about, that we find here in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and we find this hesitance, we find this embarrassment in the protagonist, and he even refuses to face, to utter, to articulate the problem, the dilemma, and he fails to do that. So that utter frustration resulting out of this inability is what we call the modern man's dilemma, and Prufrock's physical handicap becomes a sort of burden for him, which he cannot carry nor cast off, and that we find in the poem. But this is the beginning of Eliot's manifestation of modern man's problem.
Burden in the sense
Yes.
that trivial activities he can do,
Yes.
but when it is the time to face, he feels that he has now grown old. Grown
Yes.
old means he can do nothing,
Yes, yes.
and there he is a failure.
Yeah.
So the poem focuses on the failure of the modern man.
Yes, failure of the modern man. And as you rightly said, this modern man is a representative of the modern civilization, and Eliot finds this acute sense, acute perception of decay in the modern civilization, and he feels and he gives voice to this hopelessness, that there is no resurrection for this modern civilization. It is doomed to perish, as if T.S. Eliot wishes to say. The same thing we find in the Westland also, where he
just a moment.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, please.
But can we relate all these things of sense of alienation, sense of loss, or perishability, or whatever?
yeah,
Can we relate all these things to his dual identity?
yeah,
Once he is American,
Yeah.
at other times he is a British.
yeah,
So this conflict between the identity itself, the Eliot identity, that vibrates between these two cultures,
yes,
say a pandemonium like movement it is.
yes, movement.
So can we relate all these things to his conflict in the identity?
Yes, very well. You rightly suggested that he was an American emigre. He came to England and settled there.
Where
has
his
a significant-
ancestors had been there.
and has a significant relevance to his literary career. You rightly pointed out, Dr. Kinger, that
And I think he is in search of.
he is in search of, and that is in another sense, many other poets were there, for instance, Ezra Pound, etc., who fled from America because America, especially, felt that rootlessness, that sense of being without roots, more than England did. England still had a countryside that was vibrant and living, and it was not under the stress of metropolitan life. Whereas America was totally at loss when it comes to having roots. So T.S. Eliot
I
and many
remember
other.
somewhere he has said that my mind is American, whereas my heart is purely British.
Purely British.
So,
yes.
it has a kind of inbuilt conflict in it.
Yes, yes.
And this mistaken identities, I
Yes.
think that leads him to this kind of pessimism,
Yeah.
despair, hopelessness, and all these things.
And just about the time he wrote Prufrock, and immediately after that, he had a nervous breakdown, and he had to be treated for nervous breakdown. He had to take a leave of 3 months and go for treatment. So that period of nervous breakdown was caused by, as I said, by this acute pressure of the environment on him, and it was also caused by his personal circumstances. His own marriage was not very successful. He found the marriage incompatible, and he had problems with his wife. And in T.S. Eliot's in the Westland, we find that his wife was suffering from neurotic problems, and Eliot was under tremendous pressure because of that. So that sense of fruitlessness, that sense of frustration that Professor Kakkad referred to, probably originated from this.
So
his
we may
personal-
say that
yes.
his poems are the record of his personal history.
Yes,
some
that is
extent.
a very significant and relevant point, especially with Eliot, because Eliot advocated a theory of poetry where he emphasized impersonality of the poet. He said, poetry is not a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It is not a vehicle to express our emotions. Rather, it is a vehicle to get rid of emotions, to
I
free
think
ourselves
instead
from
of feelings, rather the thought governs his poetry.
intellectual element is there, but
Purely intellectual.
But
And
this-
if, other no hero we find in his poems.
Yes,
Or
yes.
if the hero is there, he is quite unheroic.
yeah, hero. That is the depiction of a modern man. This unheroic hero is typically modern phenomenon. Typically modern,
Ulysses. James Joyce,
that we
Ulysses.
find in James
Right.
Joyce, and Eliot was tremendously influenced by James Joyce. So in many other writers also we find this unheroic hero, because modern man is no longer the protagonist that we find during the Elizabethan period. Tall, towering personality, they have disappeared because modern man is no longer free. He is just a puppet in the hands of forces which are beyond his control. So that unheroic hero is typically modern, and that we find, as Professor Kakkad rightly referred to, that we find in Eliot.
And
I
impact
was
of 2 world wars too.
yeah, First World War had a tremendous impact on Western mind in general, Western life in general, and people realized the destructive power of mankind. The destructive power of mankind. It was the worst war in the history of mankind so far. Of course, Second World War was
And he had
worse
been
than
the
that. But
eyewitness
so
of
far,
it.
First World War was the worst war that mankind had seen. So mankind, for the first time, came face to face with the brutality, with the terror of man's ability to destroy itself.
Beyond
mankind-
imagination.
Beyond imagination. So that was the point. But what I was referring to before we came to that is, I will read a very brief quotation because it is very important when we talk about T.S. Eliot. Poetry is not a turning loose of emotions, he says, but an escape from emotions. So whether T.S. Eliot's poetry and his drama are personal in the sense that they express his personal emotions or not, that is a different thing altogether. And then he said, it is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality. That's what he says. It is an escape from personality. So, in this sense, we find that his poetry is his the Westland and his plays, Prufrock even.
For
They are
quatrains.
examples of his theory of poetry. Theory of poetry. What he says in his theory of poetry is this: that the experience may be personal, but the poet has to present it in such a way that it does not remain personal. That impersonality, that is the cornerstone of Eliot's theory of criticism, theory of poetry. And in this sense, though there are so many instances, so many allusions in T.S. Eliot, where we find that his personal life, his personal anguish, his personal frustration is reflected. But at the same time, Eliot has been able to transcend this personal element and turn it into something that becomes impersonal and objective. And now we go to the Westland as the slide shows. We are running out of time, so we shall have to hurry up and go through this slide as soon as possible. The poem is divided into 5 parts: the burial of the dead, a game of chess, the fire sermon, death by water, and what the thunder said. And these 5 parts of the poem, they deal with different themes. What is the theme of the Westland, we may say? What is Westland? Westland is Westland of religion, where spiritual barrenness is found, and Eliot feels that Western civilization, European civilization, has become barren. There is no possibility, as he says in the poem, what roots clutch. In the poem, he says the plain is rocky, so there is no possibility of any spiritual regeneration in the Western civilization. So one theme, we shall see if time permits in detail how these themes are treated in the Westland. So it is a Westland of spiritual or religious kind, and then Westland of fertility. Now, fertility myth, we must draw our students' attention to this, that there is a fertility myth associated with the Fisher King, and that is associated with the myth of Holy Grail. Myth of Holy Grail. And Holy Grail, holy means, and Grail is the bowl in which Christ had his last supper before he was crucified. So that Holy Grail and quest for Holy Grail has been a part of a myth in Western civilization. In this quest, there comes a region, there comes an area ruled by Fisher King, and this area was cursed, had a cruel curse that nothing would grow there. It would remain barren forever. And similar curse fell on Fisher King also, and he was rendered unable to procreate. So the Fisher King's inability to procreate and the region's barrenness, they were the part of this fertility myth. Then a knight takes up the journey and reaches to Chapel Perilous, from where he can bring fertility back to this region. So that myth is used here in the Westland, that this Western civilization is spiritually barren, and there is no hope of any regeneration, and there is no one, not a knight, who can go to the Chapel Perilous and bring back fertility to it. We find in numerous references to this in the Westland. There are characters, and all these characters, there are some women characters, there are some male characters. both of them, both the groups, they represent this theme of barrenness and lack of fertility, and that sterility that is depressing. And love and sex, they find reflection in the Westland also, in association with this theme of sterility and fertility. And Eliot believes that in the modern civilization, love and sex are no longer holy or divine activity leading to procreation. They have become mechanical, they have become depressing, and they rob men of its spiritual height. So that is how he deals with this theme of spiritual barrenness. And then there is a sense of futility of the existence of modern man. He could not find an answer that can satisfy the modern man. So that we find the sense of futility and lack of order or anarchy prevailing in the Western civilization. We are running terribly short of time, and it is indeed very difficult to do justice to Eliot in a single session, because each of his work, be it Prufrock or the Westland or the plays that four quartets, we wanted to talk about four quartets also, but we are